All right, this is going to take a little bit of concentration. I'm Bill Snodgrass, and in this SNAPlife episode, we're going to look at a concept of success that is when there's more than one entity, a person, a store, a team, that are more than one, which is trying to become successful in the same environment. And now the concept, this is very business and organization oriented, but it's also individually oriented as well. The same concepts work for an individual as they would for a store or something. And the illustration that I'm going to use to try to make this clear is a strip mall. So we're going to be talking about stores in this. The first concept is a rising tide lifts all boats. I think the whole quote or whatever it is, a rising tide lifts all boats in the harbor so that they can all sail out. They all benefit from the rising tide. Now, if something is a rising tide, you want that, and it's going to help you, and it's going to help others who are doing the same thing that you're doing. So the rising tide concept is something that says, well, this one guy on the team got this new thing that's going to give him an advantage, but because of his advantage, the whole team will benefit. A rising tide. So that strip mall concept is the one store on the strip mall gets like a refurbished grant, and they get to paint their facade, and they get to change out the door and put in new fixtures, and it makes the whole store nicer. Now, while that directly benefits that one store, it benefits everybody on the block, because now that one store that may have been run down isn't run down anymore. So the rising tide effect is that one store. The other concept is when the situation is a zero-sum game. Is it a zero-sum? And this would be where there's a limited number of things, and those things are going to distribute themselves over whatever. So if there were two farmers in the field with buckets of grain, every horse that comes from one of the farmers is a horse not going to the other farmer. It's a zero-sum game. The total number of horses, 3 over here, 4 over here, 2 over here, 2 and 5, whatever. It's a zero-sum game. They're not going to be more horses just because I have better grain. So for that guy to have better grain means he's taking horses away from me. Now, some things are a zero-sum game. There are things out there where, and when you look at the team versus team, the team with the most points wins. The zero-sum game affects when there is a limited market for a quantity or a service, and 2 or more individuals are trying to get all those customers. Now, am I going? How is this a motivational SNAPlife? You have to decide if something is a zero-sum game or is it a rising tide situation. Is it a zero-sum game or is it a rising tide situation? And you've got to decide appropriately. Back to that strip mall. If a nail salon and a hair salon are in the strip mall, people are going back and forth. So if a clothing boutique goes in, that's a rising tide situation, because all of those shops are going to benefit from that synergistic relationship between those services. But what if another clothing shop goes in? It's probably rising tide, because the more clothing shops are there, the more likely someone is going to come and shop there. What about a third clothing store, a fourth? Now, at some point, the number of shoppers is no longer going up, and the number of stores going in is going up, and so it becomes a zero-sum game. A lot of rising tide situations will slowly, is another concept called the diminishing return value of. So after a certain point, adding another store has a diminishing return. It's not going to improve the situation for everybody as if 2 or 3 came in. So is it a rising tide or is it a zero-sum game? Now here's what I hope to be the meaningful, motivational moment in this. When the circumstances change and it looks like someone might be getting ahead of you, stop and look at that and say, wait a minute, is this a rising tide? Does my friend's success in this thing eventually trickle down to mean success for me? Is it a rising tide situation or is it a zero-sum game? Are there a limited number of customers in this community, and if we put in 10 more gas stations, everybody's going to suffer because it's a zero-sum game. There's only so many tanks of gas to be bought, and the more people selling it. Complicated situation. Now I will editorialize. I believe that if you're open-minded, I believe if you're looking for it, in many situations, you can find that rising tide effect. You can find how this improvement for this one entity is going to result in an improvement for many entities around you. If we can make things better for this, it's not a trickle down, it's a rising tide. It is going to lift all the boats in the harbor. Challenge yourself to look for that rising tide connection. Not everything is, and I'm not saying that it is. Some things are zero-sum game, but I really feel like out in the real world, we're not playing Words with Friends, or we're not playing some kind of a game with me versus the other person. There's a lot of situations where it is a rising tide, where one benefit will benefit everyone. That is all for this very complex and complicated SNAPlife episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Look for those rising tides in your life and then help them out. Maybe you can contribute to the rising tide, and that will lift your boat too. See you in the next episode.